The halls of Scottish history echo with tales of treachery, where trust was a fatal mistake and hospitality a weapon. In 1440, a feast meant to broker peace became a death sentence, the infamous Black Dinner. Over 2 centuries later, another massacre unfolded under the guise of friendship, the Glencoe slaughter. Both events were orchestrated in shadow, leaving scars that never fully healed. But who truly pulled the strings? And why did these betrayals unfold with such chilling precision? The answers lie buried beneath layers of deception, where politics, power, and vengeance collided in the deadliest of ways. The candles guttered in the Great Hall of Edinburgh Castle on that bitter November night in 1440. 2 teenage boys, William Douglas, the 16-year-old Earl of Douglas, and his 12-year-old brother David, sat at the high table, the honoured guests of King James II. On the surface, it was a lavish royal banquet meant to reconcile the powerful Douglas clan with the Scottish crown. But every detail, from the seating arrangements to the servants' nervous glances, carried an undercurrent of dread. The Douglas brothers were the last male heirs of Scotland's most dangerous noble family. Their father, Archibald Douglas, had died fighting the English just 5 years earlier, leaving his sons to inherit not just lands and titles, but a legacy of near-royal authority that terrified the king's regents. The young King James, only 10 years old himself, sat watching as the evening unfolded, a puppet ruler surrounded by advisors who knew the Douglas boys had to be eliminated. Then came the moment that turned dinner into legend. As the final course was cleared, servants carried in a covered silver platter and set it before young William. When the lid was lifted, the severed head of a black bull stared up at him, the ancient Celtic symbol of impending death. In that heartbeat of horrified silence, armed guards moved in. The boys were dragged from the hall, given a mock trial on the castle ramparts, and beheaded before sunrise. Their bodies were buried in an unmarked grave near the castle's Black Tower, while their heads were displayed as a warning. But this was no simple political assassination. The sheer theatrical cruelty of the Black Dinner suggests something far more sinister at work. 3 key figures orchestrated the slaughter: Sir William Crichton, the Lord Chancellor, who controlled Edinburgh Castle; Sir Alexander Livingston, the King's Guardian; and James Douglas, Earl of Avondale, a rival branch of the Douglas family. Their motives formed a perfect storm of paranoia and ambition. The Douglas clan controlled vast territories, commanded private armies, and had recently negotiated a secret treaty with England, making them a threat to both the Scottish crown and the rival nobles who envied their power. Yet the brutality of the execution shocked even medieval Scotland. Beheading noble children violated every code of chivalry. The regents claimed they were preventing another Douglas coup, but their actions reeked of personal vendetta. Most damningly, the king's own involvement remains unclear. Was young James a willing participant, or just a frightened boy surrounded by wolves? Far from crushing the Douglas clan, the massacre ignited a firestorm. The boy's great-uncle, James Douglas, immediately seized control of the family estates and launched a campaign of vengeance. Within 3 years, Crichton was forced to flee Edinburgh, and the Douglas faction regained dominance, proving the murders had been not just cruel, but ultimately futile. Modern forensic analysis of Edinburgh Castle's ruins suggests the Black Dinner may have occurred in what's now called David's Tower, a grim irony given the young victim's name. Archaeologists have found evidence of hurried burials in the area, though the brothers' exact gravesite remains lost to history. The Black Dinner's legacy endures not just as a historical event, but as a cultural touchstone. It inspired the infamous Red Wedding in Game of Thrones, and to this day, Scottish parents warn misbehaving children that the Black Bull comes for those who don't listen. But perhaps its most chilling lesson is how easily power corrupts, and how often the innocent pay the price when rulers choose fear over justice. As the winter wind howls through Edinburgh Castle's empty halls, visitors still report hearing ghostly whispers near the Black Tower. Some claim it's just the stones settling. Others swear it's 2 young voices, forever asking why. To understand why the Black Dinner unfolded with such ruthless precision, we must examine the meteoric rise and terrifying reach of the Douglas clan in 15th century Scotland. This was no ordinary noble family. By 1440, the Black Douglases, named for their dark armor and darker reputation, controlled more land than the crown itself, commanded private armies larger than the king's, and had married into European royalty. Their power wasn't just political, it was dynastic, cultural, and increasingly seen as an existential threat to the Scottish monarchy. The roots of their dominance stretched back to Archibald Douglas, known as the Grim for his fearsome presence on the battlefield. As Lord of Galloway in the late 14th century, he transformed the Douglases from border lords into quasi-royalty through a combination of military brilliance and strategic marriages. His most audacious move was seizing control of Edinburgh Castle itself during a royal minority, the very fortress where, decades later, his descendants would meet their gruesome end. His son, Archibald the Tyneman, an ironic nickname meaning the loser, continued expanding the family's influence despite the mocking title. Though he perished fighting the English at Verneuil in 1424, his death only burnished the Douglas legend. Chronicles of the time describe how he fought on alone after his allies fled, his body later discovered surrounded by slain enemies. This martyrdom granted the Douglases something even more dangerous than land: mythic status among the Scottish people. By the 1430s, the Douglases operated with near-sovereign authority. They minted their own coins at their imposing stronghold of Threv Castle, maintained standing armies exceeding 3,000 men, while the Crown struggled to muster even 2,000, and controlled vital trade routes to France and the Low Countries. Most alarmingly, they negotiated directly with foreign powers, including a secret treaty with England in 1439, Scotland's sworn enemy. The final straw came when young William Douglas inherited this vast power at just 13 years old in 1439. His regents immediately began negotiating his marriage to Princess Margaret, the king's own sister, a union that would have placed Douglas blood on the throne within a generation. The Scottish nobility watched in horror as the Douglases inched closer to becoming royalty in all but name, yet their arrogance sowed the seeds of their downfall. During the Dalkeith meeting of 1439, Douglas allies murdered Sir John Herries, a royal favourite, during what were supposed to be peaceful negotiations. This brazen act proved the clan considered itself above the law. Their secret dealings with England crossed a line even their staunchest allies couldn't defend. And when William's armed retinue forcibly entered a royal council session at Stirling, it demonstrated open contempt for the king's authority. The Douglases had become a kingdom within a kingdom, and the fragile Scottish crown could no longer tolerate such a threat. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would unfold not on the battlefield, but in the shadows of a banquet hall where trust would prove fatal. The year 1440 found Scotland in the grip of a dangerous paradox, a kingdom ruled by a boy king surrounded by wolves. 10-year-old James II, crowned at just 6 years old after his father's mysterious death, sat uneasily on the throne while powerful regents vied for control. The Black Dinner didn't occur in a vacuum. It was the explosive culmination of years of political maneuvering around this vulnerable monarch. At the heart of this power struggle stood two men who would orchestrate the Douglas downfall: Sir William Crichton, the Lord Chancellor who controlled Edinburgh Castle's imposing fortifications, and Sir Alexander Livingston, the King's Guardian, who dominated the royal household. Their rivalry created a toxic environment where eliminating the Douglas threat became a shared goal, despite their mutual distrust. Contemporary chronicles describe young James as small of stature but keen of mind, a child forced to grow up amidst constant danger. His father, James I, had been brutally assassinated in 1437, murdered in a sewer tunnel after fleeing his attackers. This traumatic event left deep scars on both the boy and his kingdom. Now, as the sole remaining heir of the Stuart dynasty, every decision about his safety and education became a matter of state security. The regent's fear wasn't unfounded. Medieval Scotland had a history of child kings meeting violent ends. James's own great-grandfather, Robert II, came to power after the suspicious death of his predecessor. The Douglases, with their military strength and English connections, represented the perfect vehicle for another royal coup. when young Earl William began styling himself Lord of the Stewartry, and wearing purple, a colour traditionally reserved for royalty, it was seen as a direct challenge to James's authority. Yet intriguing evidence suggests James may have been more than just a passive observer. The Auchinleck Chronicle, a near-contemporary source, records that during the Black Dinner, the young king wept and pleaded for the Douglas brothers' lives. This account, if true, reveals a heartbreaking moment where the monarch's humanity clashed with his advisor's ruthlessness. Later in life, James would develop a reputation for decisive action. He personally stabbed the Douglas successor to death in 1452 during a heated argument. Some historians argue the Black Dinner's trauma shaped this violent streak. The regents justified their actions through carefully crafted propaganda. They circulated rumors that the Douglas brothers planned to kidnap James and rule through him, a plausible enough threat given recent history. Documents from the period show the royal council declaring the Douglases enemies of the state mere days before the fatal banquet, suggesting the massacre was premeditated under legal pretexts. What makes this chapter particularly chilling is how it reveals the mechanics of power in medieval Scotland. The king's minority created a vacuum that both the Douglases and the regents sought to fill. In the end, it wasn't just about eliminating rivals. It was about controlling the narrative of royal authority itself. The Black Dinner served as a grim lesson to all noble families, challenged the crown's fragile equilibrium, and even shared bread could become your last meal. As we examine the castle's surviving records, one detail stands out: the astronomical sum spent on wine for that November feast. Enough to serve hundreds. This wasn't just a dinner, it was theatre. And like all good theatre, every prop, every gesture, every toast carried hidden meaning. The real question isn't why the Douglases fell, but why they ever believed the invitation was sincere. The execution of the Douglas brothers did not bring the stability the regents had hoped for. Instead, it unleashed a chain reaction of violence that would shape Scottish politics for generations. The immediate aftermath saw the remaining Douglas faction rally around their new patriarch, James Douglas, who transformed grief into a weapon. Within months, Edinburgh Castle found itself under siege by Douglas loyalists, their banners black with mourning and vengeance. What makes this period particularly fascinating is how the Black Dinner became a political touchstone, referenced in legal disputes and diplomatic correspondence for decades afterward. When King James II reached adulthood, he faced constant reminders of that night, not just from the Douglas family, but from rival nobles, who now saw the crown's willingness to employ extreme measures. The 1452 murder of the 8th Earl of Douglas by James's own hand, stabbed during a private argument at Stirling Castle, proved that the lessons of 1440 had not been forgotten. Yet the most unexpected consequence emerged in Scotland's legal traditions. The concept of trust in noble agreements took on new, cautious dimensions. Surviving contracts from the 1450s show nobles inserting specific clauses about safe conduct, even among allies. One particularly striking document from the Douglas archives requires any meeting with royal representatives to occur in open field, with equal numbers on both sides, a direct response to the castle betrayal. The cultural impact ran even deeper. The Black Dinner entered Scottish folklore as a cautionary tale about power's corrupting nature. Ballads from the period describe the Black Bull's hide as an omen of doom, while later Protestant reformers would cite the event as evidence of Catholic nobility's moral decay. Perhaps most remarkably, the story survived in oral tradition for centuries. 19th century folklorists recorded variations of the tale in remote Highlands communities, complete with supernatural elements like phantom banquet sounds heard near ruined castles. Modern historians continue uncovering new layers to this legacy. Recent archival work revealed that the infamous Black Bull symbol may have been a deliberate callback to ancient Celtic sacrifice rituals, suggesting the regents weren't just punishing the Douglases, but ritually dismantling their power. Even today, the event's physical traces endure. Conservators at Edinburgh Castle have identified a section of stonework in David's Tower showing unusual tool marks, possibly from hasty modifications made after the murders to cleanse the space. The ultimate irony? The Black Dinner failed in its primary goal. Rather than breaking Douglas power, it created martyrs. By 1455, the family had regained enough influence to force royal concessions, though they never again reached their pre-1440 dominance. This bloody banquet became Scotland's original sin, a moment when political expediency crossed into treachery, leaving scars that never fully healed. February 13th, 1692. A blizzard howls through the valley of Glencoe as 38 MacDonald clansmen settle into their beds, unaware their guests of the past 12 days now stand over them with muskets and bayonets. This was no clan feud. It was a government-sanctioned extermination, carried out under the veneer of legality. The Glencoe Massacre shares the Black Dinner's DNA of betrayal, but with chilling modern twists: signed orders from the king, regimental discipline, and a calculated manipulation of Highland hospitality codes. The massacre's origins trace back to the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when Catholic King James VII, James II of England, fled Protestant William of Orange's invading forces. In the Scottish Highlands, where many remained loyal to the exiled Stuart line, this created a powder keg. The MacDonalds of Glencoe, notorious cattle raiders even by Highland standards, became a convenient scapegoat for William's government desperate to break Jacobite resistance. A royal decree in August 1691 offered all Highland clans pardon if they swore allegiance to William by January 1st, 1692. The MacDonald's chief, Alastair MacIan, travelled through December snowstorms to submit his oath, only to be deliberately delayed by government officials until after the deadline. This bureaucratic sabotage created the legal pretext for what followed. On February 1st, 2 companies of the Earl of Argyll's regiment arrived in Glencoe, commanded by Captain Robert Campbell of Glenlyon, a bankrupt landholder with old grudges against the MacDonalds. Following Highland custom, the clan sheltered and fed the soldiers despite their Campbell affiliation. For nearly 2 weeks, the men shared meals, played cards, and even attended mass with their hosts. Then at 5 a.m. on the 13th, the killing began simultaneously across the glen. Contemporary accounts describe soldiers dragging men from their beds and shooting them point blank, while others were slaughtered trying to flee through snowdrifts. 38 died immediately, but the true death toll climbed as women and children perished in the mountains, their homes burned behind them. Unlike the Black Dinner's shadowy perpetrators, Glencoe's architects left damning documentation. Secretary of State Lord Stair's letters reveal cold calculation. It's a great work of charity to be exact in rooting out that damnable sect. King William's signed order expressly commanded to extirpate that sect of thieves. Most chilling is the regiment's morning report noting fair weather for marching, as if describing routine drills rather than mass murder. The public outcry forced a 1695 parliamentary inquiry that condemned the massacre as murder, yet no one was punished. This legal whitewash proved just as consequential as the crime itself, demonstrating that in the new British state, Highland lives mattered less than political expediency. Recent scholarship reveals deeper complexities. Weather records confirm the killers exploited one of the worst winters in decades. DNA analysis of surviving MacDonald lineages shows how the massacre created genetic bottlenecks in certain families. Most poignant are newly translated Gaelic poems from survivors, describing how the taste of Campbell bread turned to ash in our mouths. As we stand in Glencoe today, watching shadows lengthen across the weeping glen, we're left with an uncomfortable truth. The massacre succeeded in its unstated goal. While it didn't crush Jacobitism, it marked the beginning of the end for the old Highland way of life. The British state had learned what medieval Scottish regents knew, that sometimes a single night of calculated betrayal can achieve what years of warfare cannot. The true measure of historical trauma lies not in death tolls, but in how long the wound stays open. Both the Black Dinner and Glencoe Massacre transcended their eras to become cultural touchstones, morphing from political events into psychological landmarks that defined Scottish identity. This chapter examines how 2 acts of treachery, separated by 250 years, wove themselves into the nation's collective memory, and why they still resonate today. Within decades of the Black Dinner, the event had already taken on mythic qualities. The 16th century historian Hector Bose included a dramatic retelling in his Scotorum Historiae, inventing dialogue and embellishing details, like claiming the bull's head was served on a silver platter engraved with Douglas arms. This wasn't mere storytelling, It was deliberate myth-making to frame the event as a moral lesson about power's corruption. Similarly, Glencoe entered Gaelic oral tradition almost immediately, with songs like Alastair MacCollar preserving survivor accounts through haunting lyrics that spoke of friendly bread turning to betrayal in the night. Both tragedies spawned unique commemorative practices that endure to this day. Edinburgh Castle maintained a Douglas walk for centuries, a silent procession retracing the brothers' final steps every November 24th, a tradition that only faded during the Victorian era. In Glencoe, the Clach nan Cembulach, the Campbell Stone, where survivors supposedly wept, now serves as a pilgrimage site where visitors leave coins and clan badges as tokens of remembrance. Some MacDonald families still observe the broken plate ceremony at weddings, symbolizing how hospitality was shattered in 1692 when they break a dish during the festivities. These rituals serve dual purposes, honoring victims while reinforcing clan identities against cultural assimilation, particularly during the 18th century Highland clearances when Glencoe memorials became covert protests against ongoing oppression. The physical landscapes themselves became living memorials. Edinburgh Castle's David's Tower developed a macabre reputation over the centuries, with 17th century visitors reporting ghostly banquet noises and Victorian workmen claiming to discover child-sized skeletons in the walls, though no official records confirm these grisly finds. In Glencoe, the ruined settlements of Actristan and Inverrigan were left undisturbed for generations as silent condemnations of the massacre. Modern archaeology reveals how survivors rebuilt their homes with symbolic details, doorways deliberately facing away from Campbell lands, hearthstones engraved with protective crosses, transforming domestic architecture into acts of quiet defiance. These events were repeatedly resurrected for contemporary political agendas throughout Scottish history. Jacobite rebels weaponized Glencoe's memory, branding King William as the Dutch butcher to rally support for their cause. 19th century nationalists contrasted the romanticized noble savage Highlanders with what they portrayed as the treachery of lowland politicians. Even in modern times, these tragedies retain rhetorical power. In 1995, the Scottish National Party commissioned a Glencoe-themed campaign ad, showing a handshake transforming into a dagger, proving how effectively historical betrayal could be repurposed for contemporary political messaging. Cutting-edge research now suggests such traumatic events leave physiological imprints across generations. Scientific studies of Highland descendants show elevated cortisol levels when discussing clan history, a stress response typically seen in trauma survivors. Linguists document unique phrases persisting in affected regions, like the Glencoe saying, "Never share your last loaf," a direct linguistic fossil preserving the memory of 1692's broken hospitality. These findings reveal how history embeds itself not just in stories, but in our very biology and language. Today, both sites face the paradox of remembrance versus commercialization. Edinburgh Castle's Black Dinner features prominently in ghost tours, while Glencoe hosts everything from solemn memorial hikes to serving as filming locations for popular shows like Outlander. Some historians criticize this as trivialization, but others argue it ensures the stories survive in public consciousness. As one MacDonald descendant remarked, "Better they come for photos and leave knowing the truth than never come at all." Standing in Glencoe's mist or Edinburgh's shadowed halls, we confront an uncomfortable truth. These events endure because they speak to universal fears of betrayal by those we trust most. The longevity of their memory reveals how trauma becomes woven into cultural DNA, shaping identities and worldviews across centuries. As the mists of history swirl around Edinburgh Castle and the glens of the Highlands, we're left with an unsettling realization. The Black Dinner and Glencoe Massacre were not merely historical events, but dark mirrors reflecting timeless truths about power, trust, and human nature. These tragedies reveal how easily hospitality can become a weapon, how quickly oaths can twist into nooses, and why, centuries later, their echoes still resonate. The Douglas brothers and the MacDonalds learned the hardest lesson of all, that in the game of power, the rules can change in the space between one sip of wine and the next. Yet their stories endure not just as warnings, but as testaments to resilience. From the Douglas clan's eventual resurgence to the MacDonalds' unbroken lineage, these events proved that while betrayal may win battles, it rarely wins history. As you leave this story today, consider this. In our modern world of political subterfuge and broken promises, How different are we really from those who sat at these fatal tables? The Black Bull's head still watches from the shadows of history, waiting to see if we've learned its lessons.